History often remembers armies, thousands of soldiers marching in rows, banners flying, the thunder of hooves, the crash of steel. Yet, behind the noise of battles and the grandeur of kings, there existed another world, quieter, smaller, but no less powerful. This was the world of assassins, men trained not for open war, but for shadows, not for victory in the field, but for silence in the night. Armies could conquer cities, but assassins could topple rulers. Armies could burn fortresses, but assassins could end dynasties with a single strike. Theirs was a hidden power, rarely recorded openly, often whispered about in fear. They shaped the politics of kingdoms, struck terror into the hearts of generals, and influenced history not with battles, but with silence. To understand them is to see a different side of the past, a side where survival depended not only on soldiers in armor, but also on shadows carrying daggers. Tonight, we will walk slowly through that world. We will not rush, for the story of assassins is not one of noise, but of patience, secrecy, and endurance. We will step into the alleys where they waited, into the corridors where whispers carried more weight than swords, into the chambers where the fate of kingdoms turned on a single act. And in doing so, we will see why many feared assassins more than entire armies. Before we begin this quiet journey into the hidden side of history, take a moment to breathe deeply, to settle into calm. If you enjoy these explorations of forgotten pasts, remember to like and subscribe so that the next story may find you as well. Now, let us slip into the shadows together and uncover how the world of assassins became more powerful than armies. When people think of power in the past, they often imagine vast armies stretching across valleys, banners rippling in the wind, drums beating like thunder, and swords flashing in the sun. Armies were visible. Their strength could be counted. Their movements could be tracked. Their victories and defeats carved into memory. Yet, beneath all of this grandeur, there existed another form of power, quieter, smaller, but in many ways far more terrifying. This was the power of assassins. Figures who did not fight in open battle, who did not march in rows, but who shaped the fate of rulers and kingdoms from the shadows. The true terror of assassins lay not only in their blades, but in the uncertainty they carried. A soldier on a battlefield could be seen. A siege engine could be prepared against. But an assassin was invisible until the moment of action. And even then, his presence was fleeting. He arrived without fanfare, blended into the crowd or the servant's role, slipped through doors thought to be locked, and vanished as quickly as he appeared. In this way, assassins struck not only bodies but minds. They filled rulers with doubt, and in many cases, that doubt alone was enough to change the course of history. Imagine a great hall in the Middle Ages. At its center sits a ruler, draped in rich cloth, surrounded by advisors and soldiers. Guards stand tall, their weapons gleaming, their eyes scanning the room. Servants move quietly, pouring wine, carrying platters of food, adjusting torches on the walls. To the casual eye, the ruler is safe, fortified by numbers, by loyalty, by strength. But beneath the surface, tension lingers. Everyone knows that armies may be kept at bay for months or years, but one assassin slipping silently through a crowd could unravel all that power in a single moment. Even the most secure chamber could not guarantee safety, because the true weapon of assassins was fear. Whispers spread faster than armies. A rumor of a ruler struck down in his sleep could travel across kingdoms in days. Tales of generals cut down just before leading their troops into battle spread like wildfire, shaking the confidence of soldiers who never even saw the act. Often the stories grew larger in the telling, each retelling adding more shadows, more terror, more inevitability. Whether true or exaggerated, these stories reshaped how people thought about power. Soldiers trained for months. Kings spent fortunes on walls and weapons. Yet none of it seemed enough against the silent step of an assassin. The effect was psychological as much as physical. Armies attacked bodies, but assassins attacked the mind. A king who feared being poisoned by his own servant could not rule with steady hands. A general who wondered whether a dagger waited in his tent could not lead with confidence. Some rulers became paranoid, surrounding themselves with layers of guards, refusing to eat food until others had tasted it first, or sleeping in different chambers each night so that no one could predict where they would be. Yet even with such precautions, fear lingered, because assassins required only one chance. That constant fear was a weapon in itself, shaping decisions, altering treaties, and rewriting history in silence. This invisible power explains why so many rulers treated whispers as seriously as they did armies. A king might dismiss a small enemy force at the border, but he would tremble at the rumor that assassins were near. A noble might laugh at the strength of his walls, yet secretly dread the thought that a hidden passage could carry danger into his very chamber. Entire strategies shifted because of suspicion alone. Alliances were formed not only out of ambition, but out of desperation to be spared from the silent threat. Wars were avoided, treaties signed, promises made, all because leaders knew that the greatest danger might already be inside their own halls. What makes the story of assassins so powerful is that their numbers were often small compared to armies. They were not vast legions, but they did not need to be. Their strength came from unpredictability, from the sense that they could be anywhere at any time. And because of this, rulers sometimes feared them more than tens of thousands of soldiers. Soldiers could be defeated in open battle. Armies could be worn down with time. But how do you fight an enemy you cannot see, cannot count, cannot predict? For ordinary people, assassins were figures of both dread and fascination. They were spoken of in hushed tones, their deeds exaggerated into legend. To hear that a king had been toppled not by war, but by a single hidden hand, made the world feel fragile, uncertain. It reminded everyone that power was not absolute, that wealth and armies and walls could all be undone by a single shadow in the night. That sense of fragility seeped into daily life, reinforcing the idea that history was not only shaped by great battles, but also by quiet acts that no one saw until it was too late. So when we think of power in the medieval world, let us not imagine only the vast fields of soldiers or the thunder of hooves. Let us also imagine the silence, the footsteps that went unheard, the whispers that spread faster than news of armies, the quiet hands that could alter the fate of kingdoms. For in many ways the fear of assassins was stronger than swords, and the shadows they cast across history stretched further than the banners of entire armies. History rarely creates shadows without reason. The world of assassins did not appear suddenly, nor was it born from fascination with secrecy alone. It was shaped by necessity, by politics, by desperation, and by the uneven balance of power that defined life in the medieval and early modern worlds. Armies clashed openly, nobles built towering fortresses, kings surrounded themselves with guards. And yet, even within these displays of strength, there remained spaces where violence could not be answered by strength alone. Assassins emerged to fill that space, becoming a weapon of the weak against the strong, the cunning against the numerous, and the silent against the loud. To understand their rise, imagine the fragility of kingdoms in a world where borders were always shifting. Small states found themselves pressed between greater powers. Minor lords faced ambitious rivals who commanded more men, more wealth, more weapons. For those who could not raise an army large enough to defend themselves, shadows offered a cheaper weapon. Why meet thousands of soldiers on a battlefield when one hidden hand could tilt the balance of power overnight? The very existence of assassins was an answer to inequality, a method by which those without armies could still influence the fate of rulers and empires. At the same time, the politics of courts created fertile ground for their emergence. Behind gilded doors and tapestries, power was fragile. Kings and nobles feared not only enemies beyond their walls, but also rivals within them. Ambition and rivalry thrived in silence, and the easiest way to remove a rival was not through costly wars, but through quiet elimination. A dagger in the dark required no soldiers, no open rebellion, no public declaration of intent. It was efficient, effective, and deniable. In this sense, assassins thrived, not just because enemies outside demanded their presence, but because power within courts themselves encouraged it. Assassins were also shaped by the geography of their world. Narrow alleys of medieval cities, twisting staircases within castles, hidden gardens and servants' passages. All of these became stages for silent acts. Unlike the open battlefield, cities and fortresses created shadows, corners, and moments of isolation. These were the places where an assassin could step from silence into history. Rulers might build high walls and towers, but they also built endless chambers. And within those chambers were countless opportunities for secrecy to bloom. Another force behind their rise was fear itself. Once a single assassination succeeded, its echo carried far beyond the act. Whispers spread, rumors grew, and soon entire regions trembled at the possibility of shadows. The more rulers feared assassins, the more rivals used that fear to their advantage. Some claimed assassins were hired, even when they were not, simply to sow suspicion and unrest. Others exaggerated their presence to keep enemies awake at night, doubting the loyalty of those closest to them. Fear was the soil in which assassins thrived, and every rumor made the ground richer. But it was not only rulers and nobles who contributed to this hidden world. Ordinary people, too, found themselves entangled. Some joined out of desperation, a soldier without pay, a servant with nothing to lose, a wanderer who found more profit in silence than in honest work. Others were drawn into networks by loyalty or coercion, serving as messengers, informants, or decoys. The shadow world was not made of nameless figures alone. It was fed by communities who looked the other way, by whispers in taverns, by silent exchanges in markets. It was both feared and sustained by the society around it. This hidden economy of power, shaped by assassins, often worked parallel to open politics. A treaty might be signed above ground, while, below the surface, someone was already planning a strike that would render it meaningless. Armies might gather in fields, But the decision of whether they marched or not could rest on whether a single leader lived through the night. In this way, the assassin's world was woven directly into the visible one. It was not separate, not truly hidden. It was a shadow cast by the very structures of power themselves. To walk into the birth of this shadow world is to see human nature exposed. Fear, ambition, desperation, and cunning all played their part. It was never only about the blade. It was about the moment of silence before it struck, the web of whispers that spread afterward, the changes and decisions made by those who suddenly realized their lives could be ended without warning. This world did not require thousands to shape it. It required only a handful of figures who knew that silence could be as loud as battle, and that the threat of a single strike could change more than a war. Assassins emerged because history itself demanded them. They were the answer to inequality of power, to rivalries in courts, to paranoia in rulers' hearts. They were born not in sunlight but in shadow, because the world above was never secure enough to stop the need for what lived below. And once they appeared, they never truly vanished. Their legacy continued across centuries, reshaping how rulers thought, how armies marched, and how people understood power. So when we ask why assassins appeared, the answer lies not in mystery, but in necessity. They emerged because the world required them, because silence was sometimes stronger than armies, because whispers carried further than shouts. And in that necessity, a new kind of power was born, one that would haunt rulers for centuries to come. If the blade was the weapon of an assassin, then disguise was their shield. It was not enough to be skilled with a dagger or to move silently through the night. To survive and succeed, assassins needed to be invisible, in plain sight, to melt into the very fabric of society so completely that no one would suspect their presence until it was too late. They became merchants in busy markets, servants in bustling courts, travelers on lonely roads. They were everywhere and nowhere, shifting with the moment, becoming whoever they needed to be. This mastery of disguise was what allowed them to move through cities filled with guards and palaces filled with suspicion, leaving behind only whispers and uncertainty. Imagine a crowded medieval marketplace at midday. The air is alive with voices, traders shouting prices, buyers bargaining, children weaving through stalls. Smells of spices, bread, and livestock fill the air. At first glance, nothing seems unusual. Yet within this sea of people, there is one figure who does not truly belong. He is dressed like a merchant, his hands stained, as if from travel, his voice calm as he speaks of wares. But he carries no true goods. He is there to watch, to wait, to blend. To the casual eye, he is only one of many. To those who know better, he is the shadow hiding in daylight, a presence that no one sees until the moment his purpose is revealed. Assassins learned early that survival depended on the ability to vanish not only into darkness but into ordinary life. Darkness could conceal them at night, but it could also expose them if guards searched too closely. Disguise, on the other hand, gave them freedom. It allowed them to walk through gates without suspicion, to sit quietly in taverns where their targets drank, to carry trays of food or letters of news without question. They became experts in observation, mimicking the voices, gestures, and habits of those they sought to imitate. A servant bowed just so, a messenger walked with weary haste, a soldier leaned on his spear in boredom. These small details, mastered and repeated, allowed assassins to wear their roles like second skins. In palaces, disguise was particularly effective. Servants were often invisible to nobles, moving silently through halls, carrying food, adjusting tapestries, cleaning chambers. An assassin who could slip into such a role might stand only a few feet from his target without raising suspicion. He could watch routines, listen to conversations, measure the guard's shifts, and wait for the perfect moment. In such disguises, assassins did not simply enter spaces. They studied them, learning the weaknesses no army could ever discover. Disguise was not only clothing, but behavior. To truly move unseen, assassins had to control not just what others saw, but also what they felt in their presence. If they appeared nervous, eyes might linger. If they moved too quickly, suspicion might rise. So they practiced calmness, the art of patience, the ability to walk through danger with steady steps. To act ordinary was perhaps their greatest skill, for it is often the ordinary that escapes notice. Even in cities filled with suspicion, assassins found ways to disappear. Narrow alleys and twisting streets offered escape. Crowded festivals gave cover, where masks and costumes allowed them to vanish among dancers and celebrants. Religious gatherings, fairs, and feasts were perfect stages, for in moments of noise and distraction, silence was easier to carry. An assassin might stand beside hundreds of others wearing similar garb, indistinguishable, until the moment the mask slipped away and the blade struck. There are stories of assassins disguising themselves as beggars, sitting silently by roadsides, unseen by those who passed. Others dressed as soldiers, joining patrols without ever being questioned. Some even became scribes or clerks, their ink-stained hands hiding the strength they carried. Their quiet work granting them access to records and movements others could not know. Every role was an opportunity, every disguise a new weapon. This mastery of disguise did more than protect assassins. It unsettled those who feared them. If anyone could be an assassin, then no one could be trusted. The servant carrying food, the messenger with a letter, the traveler seeking rest, all became potential threats. Rulers grew suspicious of their closest attendants. Guards watched one another as much as the gates they patrolled. This uncertainty was more powerful than the blade itself, for it fractured trust, sowed paranoia, and weakened the very structures meant to protect. Over centuries, the legend of assassins as masters of disguise only deepened. Tales spread of figures who slipped in and out of cities unseen, of rulers who fell because someone they trusted was not who they seemed, of assassins who could vanish into crowds as if swallowed by the earth. Whether every story was true did not matter. The fear they created ensured that disguise was as feared as the dagger itself. To walk in their world today is to imagine every crowd differently. You look at a bustling street, a hall filled with servants, a festival alive with laughter, and you wonder who among them is more than they appear. That question, planted centuries ago, remains part of the assassin's legacy. For they taught history that power does not always march with banners or wear crowns. Sometimes it wears the clothes of the ordinary, moves in silence, and waits unseen until the moment it chooses to strike. So when we remember assassins, let us not picture only their weapons or their shadows in the night. Let us also remember their disguises, the masks they wore, the roles they played, the ordinary faces that hid extraordinary danger. For in the end, their greatest power was not the blade in their hand, but the ability to stand in plain sight and be seen as nothing at all. An army's power was measured in its weapons, spears that bristled in endless rows, swords that flashed in sunlight, siege engines that shook castle walls. These were loud, heavy, visible instruments of destruction. But the tools of assassins were different. They were not meant to terrify crowds with their presence, but to end lives quietly with as little sound as possible. Theirs was a world of silence, and every weapon, every method, every small gesture was designed to slip unnoticed through shadows and leave behind only whispers. The dagger was the most iconic weapon of the assassin. Unlike a sword, it was small, easy to conceal beneath a cloak or inside a sleeve. Its blade was quick to draw, silent in use, and effective at close range. A dagger could pass through crowded halls without notice, disguised as an ornament, or hidden in plain sight. For assassins, the dagger was not only a tool, but a symbol, the embodiment of quiet precision, of ending power not with armies, but with a single strike. Some daggers were plain, meant only to kill and be forgotten. Others were carefully crafted, their edges honed so finely that they could cut with barely a whisper. Poison was another weapon, one feared as much for its invisibility as for its lethality. Where armies broke walls, poison seeped into food, into wine, into water. It could be carried in a vial no larger than a fingertip, hidden in a pouch or stitched into clothing. To use poison required patience, waiting for the right opportunity, for the cup to be unguarded, for the plate to be left unattended. Once delivered, it worked silently, sometimes slowly, leaving victims weak, confused, and then gone. This method sowed even greater fear than blades, for rulers could not trust even their daily bread. Every meal became a risk, every servant a possible danger. In this way, poison extended the assassin's reach far beyond the shadows, into the very heart of ordinary life. Disguise, which we have already seen as a shield, also doubled as a weapon in itself. The ability to move unseen, to enter forbidden places, to stand beside a ruler without raising alarm, this was as deadly as any blade. A servant's tray became a hiding place for death. A messenger's scroll might carry more than words. Even the absence of weapons was sometimes the assassin's tool, for their true weapon was access. And once access was gained, anything at hand could be turned lethal, a cord pulled tight, a candle's flame pushed close, even bare hands if the moment demanded. But assassins also relied on methods beyond the act of killing. They were masters of patience. An army struck all at once, but an assassin might wait days, weeks, even months for the perfect opportunity. Watching a target's habits, learning their routines, memorizing guard changes and the creak of doors, these details mattered more than brute strength. In this patience lay their greatest discipline. For an assassin, failure was not only dangerous, but often fatal. They had one chance, and one chance alone. To wait for the right moment was as much a weapon as any dagger. Stealth itself was another method, perfected through endless practice. Assassins trained their bodies to move quietly, to control breathing, to step lightly on stone or earth without sound. They learned how to blend with shadows, how to use noise in the environment to mask their movements. The crash of a door, the howl of wind, the ringing of bells. Every sense was sharpened, every movement calculated. until their approach was less like a soldier's march and more like the passing of a whispered dot. There were also psychological tools. Assassins understood the power of fear. Sometimes the act of striking was less important than the anticipation it created. The knowledge that assassins existed, that they could be anywhere, was itself a weapon. Threats, rumors, and warnings could paralyze rulers as effectively as any blade. To be told that an assassin was near was enough to change behavior, to make leaders retreat behind walls, to cancel meetings, to refuse food and drink. This paralysis weakened their enemies long before the strike ever came. Yet for all their tools, the true strength of assassins lay not in the objects they carried, but in the way they used them. A dagger in one hand was no different from a soldier's blade, but in the assassin's hand it became precise, silent, purposeful. A vial of poison in a healer's pouch could be harmless, but in the assassin's it became a silent storm waiting to be unleashed. Their mastery was not in invention, but in application, in turning the ordinary into extraordinary, the harmless into lethal, the unseen into unforgettable. Centuries later, when historians uncover their methods, what strikes us most is not only their ingenuity, but their restraint. Assassins did not carry arsenals. They carried little more than what they needed, and with that they shifted the fate of kingdoms. Their weapons were not meant to win battles, but to erase them, to prevent wars by removing leaders before the armies ever marched. In their silence lay a power that rivaled armies themselves. So when we think of assassins, let us not imagine only the dagger gleaming in the dark. Let us remember the patience, the stealth, the disguises, the poisons, the whispers, and above all the silence. For it was not noise that gave them power, but the absence of it, the stillness in which history changed without anyone realizing until it was too late. Kings ruled with crowns of gold, sat upon thrones of carved stone, and commanded armies that stretched across valleys. Their word was law, their presence awe-inspiring, their courts filled with music, light, and loyal guards. Yet beneath all this majesty lay fragility. For no matter how high a throne stood, no matter how many walls surrounded a palace, no matter how many soldiers filled its halls, a king remained human. He ate, he drank, he slept. He trusted others to serve, to guard, to advise. And in those small moments of human vulnerability, assassins found their strength. The clash of armies was noisy, visible, and costly. It demanded months of preparation, supplies, and lives. But the shadow of a single assassin could undo years of planning in one night. A kingdom prepared for war might collapse if its king fell silently in his chamber. A general ready to lead tens of thousands could be ended with one well-placed blade. Assassins understood that thrones were not toppled by force alone. They could be tilted by silence, by whispers, by shadows that slipped where armies could not. Imagine the great hall of a medieval palace. Torches cast flickering light upon tapestries. Musicians play softly, courtiers whisper in corners, and guards stand at every door. To all eyes, the king is untouchable. Yet, unseen in the bustle, danger waits. Perhaps it is a servant pouring wine, his hand steady but his vial hidden. Perhaps it is a messenger with scrolls, carrying not only words but intent. Or perhaps it is someone already inside the court, dressed as a scribe, blending among the forgotten figures of the hall. All it takes is one moment, one hesitation from the guards, one distraction in the music, and the king's world can collapse before anyone realizes what has happened. The power of assassins over kings was not only in the act, but in the anticipation. Rulers lived with constant unease. Every shadow in their chamber, every stranger in their hall, every servant carrying food might conceal a silent hand. Some kings became prisoners of their own fear, building layers of protection that suffocated them. They slept in different rooms each night, dined only after others had tasted their food, and demanded endless watchfulness from guards. Yet even then, unease clung to them, for no guard could stop what could not be seen. History remembers kings for their crowns, but often their downfall came from silence, not from battle. Some were said to have fallen while surrounded by loyal armies, struck down not by soldiers, but by unseen hands that bypassed every defense. Tales spread of rulers poisoned in their wine, of monarchs ending their days in bed, not from illness, but from a hidden touch of death. Whether all such accounts are true matters less than the fear they created. The mere possibility of an assassin's hand was enough to change how rulers lived, how they trusted, and how they ruled. This fragile balance between power and vulnerability reshaped politics itself. Thrones were not as steady as they appeared. Alliances were formed in whispers, not only for gain but to secure safety. Enemies became cautious, knowing that assassins could tilt the scales faster than armies. Some rulers even sought to hire assassins themselves, turning shadows into their own weapons, seeking to strike rivals before rivals struck them. In this cycle, thrones became less about crowns and more about survival in silence. What made assassins so powerful against kings was their ability to bypass strength. Walls, guards, armies, all could be avoided with patience and cunning. Kings who thought themselves untouchable often learned too late that crowns did not protect against shadows, and those who survived knew that their survival was never guaranteed. This knowledge was heavier than any crown, a weight carried daily, shaping every decision. When we look back today, it is easy to see kings as untouchable figures, their reigns written in stone, their portraits painted in grandeur. But beneath the surface of those images lies the truth. Thrones were fragile, and shadows often shaped them as much as armies. Assassins reminded the world that power was not absolute, that even the mightiest ruler could be undone by silence. So when we speak of kings and crowns, let us also speak of shadows, of the assassins who waited unseen, whose presence bent politics, whose silence toppled thrones. For in their world it was not always the loudest battles that shaped history, but the quietest moments, the whispers stronger than swords. No assassin, no matter how skilled, could thrive entirely alone. To strike and vanish required more than courage. It required information, safe places, allies, and silence that stretched further than a single person could manage. Behind many of the most famous assassins stood hidden brotherhoods and secretive orders, webs of trust woven in the shadows, networks that extended from the poorest village streets to the richest royal courts. These brotherhoods did not march like armies, yet they rivaled them in power. They were invisible forces, shaping history quietly. Their presence felt but rarely seen. Imagine stepping into a medieval tavern at night. The air is thick with smoke, the sound of dice clattering across tables, and the low murmur of voices trading stories. In one corner sits a cloaked figure, seemingly lost in thought. A few tables away, another man listens without speaking, eyes half hidden beneath a hood. At first, nothing seems unusual. Yet beneath the laughter and noise, a silent network is at work. Coins slide across tables, not as wagers, but as payments. A word is exchanged that sounds meaningless, but it is a signal, understood only by those who belong. An ordinary tavern becomes a place of shadows, where the brotherhood gathers unseen by those around them. These hidden orders functioned with careful organization. Some were tightly bound, swearing loyalty to leaders whose names were known only within their ranks. Others were looser, more like webs of acquaintances and informants, connected by mutual benefit rather than oath. Yet all shared one truth. The assassin's strength lay in the network. One man with a blade could strike once, perhaps twice, but a network could gather intelligence, plan escapes, arrange disguises, provide weapons, and silence witnesses. A brotherhood transformed an assassin from a lone figure into a force capable of reshaping kingdoms. Information was their greatest currency. Armies relied on scouts, but assassins relied on whispers. Networks stretched into markets, where merchants passed along rumors of a ruler's movements. Servants in castles became silent observers, their eyes noting guard changes and locked doors. Travelers carried news along roads, passing coded messages at inns. Every piece of knowledge, however small, became part of a greater web. A king's routine, a general's habit, the location of a hidden door. All of it was collected, stored, and shared through unseen hands. With this information, the assassin's blade became sharper than steel. Safe houses were another part of the shadow network. In cities, ordinary homes doubled as sanctuaries, their doors opening to those who carried the right signal. In remote villages, barns or cellars provided shelter, where an assassin could vanish for days, blending into the lives of peasants. Monasteries, markets, and even caravans became part of this web, knowingly or unknowingly. Each safe place allowed assassins to move across regions unseen, never staying too long, always leaving before suspicion could take root. In this way, the network itself became a fortress, not of stone, but of trust and secrecy. Brotherhoods also created a sense of belonging. To live as an assassin was to live with constant danger, but within a brotherhood, that danger was shared. They trained together, passed on techniques, and whispered the lessons of those who had fallen. A lone assassin might be skilled, but a brotherhood could preserve knowledge across generations. Tricks of disguise, recipes for poisons, methods of stealth, all were guarded and taught in silence. These hidden traditions ensured that even as rulers changed and kingdoms rose or fell, the art of assassination endured. The existence of these networks terrified rulers as much as the assassins themselves. To face one assassin was frightening enough, but to realize that they were part of a hidden web that could stretch across cities and countries was unsettling on an even deeper level. It meant that shadows could not be eliminated simply by killing one figure. The Brotherhood lived on, invisible and untouchable, ready to strike again. This realization bred paranoia in courts, as rulers wondered not only who might carry the blade, but how many others watched silently, waiting for the right moment. In some places, These brotherhoods became legends in their own right. Tales spread of secret orders who swore loyalty not to kings, but to their own hidden leaders. Some were said to live by strict codes, striking only for causes they deemed just. Others were seen as mercenaries of silence, loyal to coin above all else. Whether fact or legend, these stories deepen the aura of mystery, making the networks seem even more powerful than perhaps they truly were. For fear thrives on imagination, and imagination painted these brotherhoods as endless, unstoppable forces. When we think of assassins, it is tempting to picture only a solitary figure slipping through shadows. But the truth is more complex. Behind every act stood whispers gathered by many safe houses offered by allies and networks of trust that spanned unseen across lands. It was these brotherhoods and hidden orders that transformed assassins from isolated figures into forces that could rival armies. They were not only individuals, but parts of a greater whole, a web of silence stretched across history. So when we remember the assassins, let us not forget the networks that sustained them, the brotherhoods in taverns, the whispers in markets, the coded signals passed between travelers. They remind us that even the smallest connections can weave a power strong enough to topple thrones. A blade can cut flesh. Poison can end breath. But there is a weapon older, sharper, and far more enduring than either: fear. Armies might occupy land, walls might shield palaces, but fear slips through cracks no stone can stop. It travels faster than soldiers, it lingers longer than wounds, and it shapes decisions before steel is ever drawn. For assassins, fear was not only a consequence of their actions, it was their greatest tool. Even when their daggers were sheathed and their hands were still, the rumors that surrounded them moved like shadows across kingdoms, sowing terror and altering history without a single strike. Imagine a quiet marketplace in a medieval town. Merchants call out prices. Children laugh. Animals shuffle at their tethers. Then someone whispers a story. A king in a distant land struck down by an assassin in his own chamber, despite his guards and walls. The story spreads from stall to stall, mouth to mouth. By sunset, it has traveled beyond the market. By the next day, it has reached the castle, where lords and knights sit uneasily, wondering if their own rulers might be next. The act itself may have happened hundreds of miles away, but the fear it sparks travels without boundary. Rumors gave assassins reach far beyond their numbers. There were never armies of them filling valleys. Their presence was scattered, their strikes few compared to the countless battles fought in history. Yet because of fear, their influence felt endless. One assassination could echo across continents, magnified by stories told in taverns, carried by travelers, embroidered by imagination. Every retelling made them larger, more dangerous, more unstoppable. The assassin who struck once became, in rumor, 1,000 assassins waiting everywhere. This multiplication of fear was more powerful than any army's march. Kings, nobles, and generals lived in the grip of this invisible weapon. They surrounded themselves with guards, yet still wondered if a hand already moved within their circle. They built walls higher, but still feared the servant carrying a cup. They tightened security, but every whisper of an assassin near sent panic through their courts. Some rulers became prisoners of their own paranoia, unable to eat, sleep, or trust, undone not by the blade itself, but by the shadow of fear it cast. In this way, assassins defeated kings without ever touching them. The power of rumor also reshaped politics. A noble accused of hiring assassins might be avoided by allies, even if no proof existed. A ruler believed to be marked for death might lose followers, soldiers deserting before the blade ever struck. Sometimes the mere suggestion of an assassin's involvement in a death, whether by accident, illness, or fate, was enough to rewrite history. It must have been the assassins, people whispered, and the legend grew stronger. Each rumor fed the fear, and each fear fed the power of those who thrived in shadow. What made fear so enduring was its invisibility. A blade could be parried, poison detected, disguise uncovered. But fear had no form to strike against. It lived in minds, in the unease of rulers, in the doubts of soldiers, in the whispers of peasants. Even if every assassin had vanished, their legacy of fear would have remained, carried forward by rumor alone. This is why assassins never needed to be everywhere. Fear placed them everywhere. Ordinary people were not, untouched by this atmosphere. In villages, parents warned children not to stray into alleys, whispering that assassins lurked in shadows. In cities, strangers were eyed with suspicion. Travelers questioned more harshly. Servants distrusted. Fear eroded the bonds of trust that held communities together. And yet it also gave assassins their greatest cover, because when everyone feared shadows, the true assassin could move unseen among them. The cycle of fear was self-sustaining. Each successful strike created not just one death, but 1,000 stories. Each story created more fear, which made the next strike even more powerful, even if it never came. Assassins became legends not because of how many lives they took, but because of how many lives were shaped by the possibility of their presence. They mastered silence, but more importantly, they mastered the human imagination, which can turn a whisper into a storm. So when we think of the assassins, let us not see only the dagger hidden in a sleeve or the vial of poison slipped into a cup. Let us also see the whispers traveling faster than riders, the rumors twisting stronger than swords, the fear that could topple thrones without a single blow. For in truth, fear was their sharpest weapon, and rumor was the blade they never needed to draw. To become an assassin was not simply to hold a blade. It was to enter a world of silence, patience, and endless discipline. Unlike soldiers who trained in broad fields, clashing loudly with spears and shields, assassins trained in corners, in shadows, in hidden courtyards where no eyes could watch. Their art was not noise, but control. Their power came not from numbers, but from precision. To move unseen, to wait without end, to strike once and never again. This was not instinct, but skill carefully honed through years of practice. Imagine a young recruit taken into such a hidden order. He does not begin with weapons. Instead, he learns to walk. Every step is corrected. Too heavy, and it echoes. Too fast, and it draws attention. He learns to place his feet softly, rolling from heel to toe, gliding rather than stomping. For weeks he practices in silence, moving across gravel, across wood, across stone, until he can cross a chamber without a single sound. He learns to breathe lightly, to calm the rhythm of his lungs, to blend his presence with the hum of the world around him. In this way, even before he touches a blade, he begins to master the art of silence. Balance and patience are next. An assassin cannot strike if he cannot wait. Hours are spent standing still, hidden in shadow, observing without moving. The discipline is grueling. Muscles ache, the mind longs to wander, yet still he waits, learning to let time flow around him. This patience becomes as much a weapon as steel, for the assassin who can wait out a guard's shift, who can watch without rest, is the one who survives. He learns to become invisible, not through disguise alone, but through endurance. Training also involves the mind. To strike a king or a general requires more than strength. It requires focus that does not waver. Recruits are tested with distraction. Sudden noises, unexpected movements, changes in routine. They are taught to keep their eyes fixed on the goal, their minds steady against temptation. Emotional control is drilled into them. Rage must be silenced, fear mastered, excitement hidden. For an assassin who shows too much reveals himself before the act. Their greatest strength lies in appearing ordinary, unremarkable, until the moment they choose otherwise. Weapons, when finally introduced, are treated as extensions of the body. Daggers are held not with pride, but with precision, each angle measured, each movement practiced. Blades are drawn and sheathed in silence, until the motion becomes as natural as breathing. Recruits learn to strike not with flourish, but with simplicity. One swift movement, no wasted effort. They practice in confined spaces, where wide swings are impossible. For an assassin's blade must serve in hallways, in chambers, in alleys, not on open fields. Poisons are studied not for cruelty, but for their subtlety. A few drops in wine, a powder slipped into food. These methods require not only knowledge but restraint, for one mistake could mean discovery. Climbing and agility form another part of their training. Walls, towers, and rooftops are not barriers but paths. Recruits learn to scale stone quietly, to balance on narrow ledges, to slip through windows left unguarded. Rope, hook, and shear will become their allies. They practice moving in darkness, guided by touch and memory, until they can navigate without light. Every sense is sharpened. The faintest creak of wood warns them. The slightest change in air tells of an open passage. In time, their bodies become as finely trained as their minds, capable of moving where ordinary men would stumble. Yet beyond all this skill lies discipline. The life of an assassin is not one of glory. It is a life of secrecy, of restraint, of sacrifice. To reveal oneself is to fail. To speak too freely is to invite death. Recruits are taught loyalty to silence above all else. They learn that their greatest victories will never be known, their greatest acts never celebrated. What they do is not for honor but for necessity. Their art is survival, not fame. This acceptance requires immense discipline, for to live without recognition is to live in the shadows even of memory. The training does not end when a recruit becomes skilled. It continues through life. Each mission is a lesson, each failure a reminder, each survival a mark of progress. Assassins refine themselves endlessly, practicing silence even in ordinary life, honing patience even in moments of calm. Their craft is not a stage to be mastered once, but a path to be walked forever, a discipline that shapes their very being until they are no longer ordinary men, but living shadows. To understand their training is to understand why assassins could rival armies. Armies relied on numbers, on sheer strength and force. Assassins relied on skill, sharpened and perfected until one man became as dangerous as a battalion. Their discipline turned silence into a weapon, patience into power, and invisibility into influence. They proved that control of the self could be as mighty as control of thousands, and that the greatest strength often lies not in noise but in stillness. So when we think of assassins, let us not only see the moment of the strike, let us also imagine the years of training that led to it, the endless hours of silence, the steady patience, the control of breath and thought. For in truth, their art was not in killing, but in mastering themselves so completely that they could vanish into the world and reappear only when history demanded it. That is why their shadow stretched further than armies, because their discipline made them more than men. Empires are often remembered in stone, towering walls, endless roads, palaces carved with gold, and armies that stretch like rivers across valleys. Yet history, when studied closely, shows us something quieter. Empires could be shaped not only by legions of soldiers, but by shadows moving in silence. Assassins, though few in number, left their mark on entire nations. They changed the course of wars, tilted the balance of power, and altered destinies not by raising banners, but by ending lives at the right moment. Consider the fragility of an empire. Though it may appear invincible, it often rested on the shoulders of a single ruler, a handful of generals, or the fragile web of alliances binding its provinces together. If one ruler fell, the empire might splinter. If one general was silenced, a campaign might collapse. If one alliance dissolved in blood, enemies seized their chance. Assassins understood this fragility, and their strikes were precise, aimed not at destroying armies in the field, but at removing the keystones that held the great arch of empire. Together, imagine a mighty general preparing for battle. His soldiers gather in ranks, weapons polished, banners rising in the morning wind. The enemy waits across the valley, equally prepared. Both armies are ready to clash, their numbers evenly matched. But the night before the march, the general does not wake. A shadow slipped into his tent, and in a single strike silenced him forever. By dawn, his soldiers are leaderless, their morale shattered. Panic spreads. The army disperses before the battle is even fought. No clash of steel, no roar of victory. The fate of the campaign decided in silence. Such moments were not myth alone. They were the subtle fingerprints of assassins on the grand canvas of empires. Rumors of these strikes spread far and wide, magnifying their impact. An empire might lose only one ruler or general, but whispers made it seem as though assassins controlled every outcome. This fear weakened trust. Leaders doubted their closest allies. Armies hesitated to march. Treaties collapsed because one side feared what might lurk in the shadows of the other. Thus, assassins not only struck bodies but infected entire nations with doubt, making the ground beneath empires tremble. The power of assassins was especially dangerous in times of political unrest. Empires often spanned vast lands filled with diverse peoples, each with their own ambitions. Rival factions watched one another with suspicion, waiting for any sign of weakness. An assassination could ignite rebellion, convincing provinces that the empire was faltering. The death of a single man could inspire uprisings that armies struggled to contain. In this way, assassins acted as sparks, small in themselves, yet capable of setting entire landscapes ablaze. Sometimes assassins served as instruments of empire rather than enemies of it. Rulers used them quietly, sending shadows into rival courts, removing troublesome nobles, silencing dissent. These acts were rarely recorded openly, for to admit reliance on assassins was to admit fragility. Yet in the whispers of history we find evidence. Sudden deaths too convenient. Rivals silenced too perfectly. Wars ended before they began. In these moments, assassins became part of empire itself, woven into the very fabric of its survival. What made assassins uniquely powerful was their ability to bypass the visible strengths of nations. Walls, fortresses, and armies could not stop a single hidden figure who carried patience and silence as his weapons. Empires built on stone discovered that shadows could slip through cracks no wall could seal. The vastness of armies meant nothing if a ruler feared his own cup of wine. This inversion of power, where the smallest could unmake the greatest, haunted empires across centuries. The legacy of these acts lingers in the way history remembers empires. We see their grandeur in ruins, their victories in chronicles, yet woven into these tales are moments of sudden silence, unexplained shifts, leaders gone before their time. Behind many of these gaps may have stood an assassin, forgotten by name, but remembered in effect. For though empires often claimed eternity, their fates could turn on the smallest of shadows. To stand today among the ruins of empires is to feel their silence. The stones speak of battles and rulers, but they also whisper of moments unseen. A blade in a chamber, a cup touched with poison, a shadow slipping through a gate. These moments, though hidden, shaped nations as surely as armies ever did. They remind us that power is never as secure as it seems, and that history is not only written in the roar of battles, but also in the silence of shadows. So when we remember empires, let us not think only of their armies, their roads, their monuments. Let us also remember the assassins, the quiet figures whose hands, though few, left marks as wide as nations. For in their silence they proved that shadows could change the fate of empires as surely as swords could. Empires have risen and fallen. Kings have worn crowns of gold and lost them. Armies have thundered across valleys, their banners lost to the winds of time. Yet through all these centuries, one image has remained, lingering in the memory of history like a shadow that refuses to fade: the assassin. Though their names are often forgotten, though their deeds are shrouded in whispers rather than written in chronicles, their presence still haunts us. Why is this? Why, even after centuries, do assassins remain etched into our imagination as figures of both fear and fascination? The answer lies not only in what they did, but in what they represented. Assassins were proof that power was never absolute. They revealed the cracks in crowns, the weakness in fortresses, the fragility of armies. Kings could not command loyalty strong enough to stop a shadow. Generals could not build walls high enough to block a whisper. Empires could not raise armies vast enough to guard against silence. This truth unsettled the powerful and comforted the powerless, for it showed that even the greatest could be unmade by the smallest stories of assassins were told and retold not because of the act itself, but because of what it symbolized: the uncertainty of life, the unpredictability of history. A single strike could turn victory into defeat, stability into chaos, rule into ruin. And this knowledge was not confined to the past. It passed down through generations, shaping how people viewed power itself. Even today, when we read of ancient kings or long-lost empires, part of us wonders, who truly ended their reign? Was it the armies we see in chronicles, or was it the quiet hand that history chose not to name? Assassins haunt us because they remind us of silence. Most of history is written in noise, the clash of armies, the roar of crowds, the speeches of rulers. Yet assassins remind us that silence, too, shapes destiny. A single moment in a quiet chamber could carry more weight than months of battle. A whisper in the dark could tilt the fate of nations more surely than 1,000 swords. This silence unsettles us, for it suggests that history is not only made in public, but also in hidden places, unseen and unheard. Their legacy also endures because it is human. Assassins were not armies or monuments. They were individuals, ordinary in appearance, extraordinary in patience and skill. Their power came not from wealth or titles, but from discipline, cunning, and silence. In this way, they remind us that individuals matter, that even the smallest voice or hand can change the course of history. That thought lingers because it is both terrifying and empowering. Terrifying for rulers, empowering for those who live in shadows. The image of assassins lingers in stories, myths, and legends. Some are exaggerated, painting them as almost supernatural figures. Others are softened, imagining them as protectors rather than killers. But beneath all these layers, the essence remains the same. The assassin is the figure who proves that no power is safe, no crown uncheckable, no wall unbreakable. That is why they still haunt history, not for the blood they spilled, but for the truths they revealed. To walk through ruins today, to see broken thrones or silent fortresses, is to feel their presence. You may not see their names carved in stone, but their silence echoes. The stones whisper of battles fought, but also of chambers where shadows slipped unseen. They remind us that behind every monument lies another story, one of silence, patience, and fear. The legacy of assassins is not glory, not fame, but memory, a memory that endures precisely because it hides. And perhaps that is the greatest paradox of all. The figures who lived in shadows, who sought to be unseen, are the very ones who remain most vividly in the imagination of history. And so our journey into the world of assassins comes to an end. We have walked the silent corridors where whispers carried more weight than swords. We have seen how kings feared shadows more than armies, how empires trembled at silence more than steel, how fear itself became a weapon sharper than any blade. The assassins we have explored tonight were never vast in number, yet their presence stretched across centuries, shaping rulers, armies, and nations. They remind us that history is not only written in battles and monuments, but also in moments unseen, in choices made in darkness, in acts that left no sound but changed everything. As you rest now, let these shadows drift softly in your thoughts. Picture the silent halls where rulers once walked, uncertain of the faces around them. Imagine the quiet steps of figures moving unseen, their patience greater than armies, their discipline stronger than crowns. Remember that power is never absolute, and that history often turns not on noise, but on silence. If you have found calm in this journey through forgotten shadows, remember to like and subscribe so that the next story of history may find you again. For now, let the echoes of silence carry you toward rest. The shadows grow still, the whispers fade, and the world of assassins slips once more into memory. waiting, quiet, eternal.